Welcome back to our Leadership and Teams class and our series of videos with regard to the topics that we're covering. The next topic that we're going to be looking at is power and influence. And if you think about leadership, don't you oftentimes think about power and influence? So it's a key topic to take a look at. And with regard to this, I'll start off, I'll talk about power, and then I'm going to close by talking about influence. Let's start off with regard to power. The first thing I want to do is I want to give you some definitions. It's going to include power and some other things. I want to talk about three key buzzwords, three key words you want to take a look at: power, influence, and authority. They're different. They're not the same. Well, how are they different? Well, let's take a look at your textbook definition for it. Power is defined as the ability to influence and exercise control over others. The ability to influence and exercise control over others. Some people would say that this involves persuasion and things, but it's a little bit different. So again, the first word is power. The second word is influence, which is what we'll get to towards the end of this lecture today. Influence is defined by your textbook as the power to affect but not control the course of action. The power to affect but not control the course of action. I can't tell you what to do, but I can try to influence you to do what I want you to do. And finally, the third and final definition is the word authority. Authority. This is the power that's vested in a position. You're the president, you're allowed to do this, that, and the other. You're the manager of this department, you have the authority to do this, that, and the other. So there's a difference between power, influence, and authority. So that's the first major topic, some key definitions. Let's take a look at the second major topic. Sources of power for individuals. Sources of power for individuals. Your textbook says that there are probably 5 sources. There are 5 sources. I think there's probably others as well, but these 5 are really good. The first is legitimate power. Legitimate power. This is what the power that you get from whatever position you might have. This oftentimes leads to compliance. The president says, close the door. We close the door. The second source of power is reward power. Reward power. I can reward you with things. You want to be rewarded, therefore you give me power because you want to be rewarded. This can lead to resistance if you as a follower think you're being bought. If you think you're being bought, you're not getting the reward because you're supposed to, you're being rewarded because I'm trying to buy you, I'm kind of bribing you. That might lead to resistance. The next source of power is called coercive power. Coercive power. If you don't do this, you're fired. If you don't do this, you don't get this benefit or that benefit, or you're going to get this negative or that negative. Coercive power. This oftentimes leads to resistance. People don't like that. We can go back to when you were a kid at home, and mom and dad were saying, "Oh, if you don't do this, you don't get to watch Blue's Clues tonight," or whatever it was. As a little kid, you didn't like that, and as an adult, you don't like it as either. Let's take a look at the next type of, next source of power. It's called expert power. Expert power. You've built a reputation, you've done some studying, you have some experience in a certain area. People look at you as an expert. Because of that, they give you power. Whether you're bright as a bright bulb or dim as a dead bulb, a light bulb, nonetheless, oftentimes you get power just from the fact that people think that you're an expert. Expert power can lead to commitment. People think, you know what you're talking about. You're an expert. Yes, indeed, we're going to follow you, whatever you want us to do. And the last source of power is called reverent power. Reverent power. This is where you revere somebody. This is where somebody, has, people looking up to him or her based on, just being a good person, a wise person, somebody who you look at and you just think, oh my goodness, that's someone who's good, and I want to follow that person. This also oftentimes leads to commitment. So the 5 sources of power: legitimate, reward, coercive, expert, and reverent. Let's go to the next of the key topics under power. Sources of power for top executives. Sources of power for top executives. The other sources of power for individuals, which could be top executives, they can use that too. But sources of power for top executives, textbook's a little bit more specific here with regard to what type of power a top executive might have. And once again, we have 5, so let's take a look at it. The first source of power for top executives is legitimate power and their position. You're the CEO, and you said to do this. You're on the board of directors, you said to do this. Certainly that's a source of power for a top executive. Another source of power for a top executive, the second one, is the distribution of resources. The distribution of resources. Hey, if I'm a top executive, I'm going to be able to tell what department gets this money in the budget, what department gets new employees, what department gets new equipment or whatever. So the distribution of resources. Let me give you an example of this where even on a smaller level, it certainly is a source of power. I mentioned to you I've done a lot with regard to youth baseball. And one of the things I can say is that being a coach is a tremendous experience. But when you're a coach, it's not an independent team, but you're in a league, all of a sudden now, no matter how much power you might have in the league has power over you. So in the athletic association that most of the teams I managed were in this league, so to speak, in this association, every year they would elect officers, be president, vice president, secretary, and all those different things. And one of the things I learned pretty early was that as a baseball coach, I wanted to have access to the fields. I wanted to have access to practice. My team needs some practice. I want to have access with regard to rescheduling makeup games. It was rained out yesterday. Can I play today? So I ran for an office. I didn't run for president. I wanted something I thought was even more powerful and also didn't necessarily have all the headaches associated with it. So, for example, a president would have. So I ran to be the field coordinator. And in our organization, we had all sorts of different fields for the different age groups and whatever. And I was a coordinator. So if you wanted to use a field, you had to come through me. And you wanted to use a field today, last minute you're coming to me. Well, I have power. And you recognize I have power. And oftentimes you even give me more power because you recognize you want this resource from me. So again, this concept of getting power through resources is a huge way to get power in your leadership circle. Let's take a look at the next source of power for top executives, and that's control of the decision criteria. The control of the decision criteria. As top executive, we get to figure out, if you're a top executive, we get to figure out how we're going to decide this, not just what the decision is, but how. And what are we going to look at? Okay, we'll look at this, but we're not going to look at that, etc. This concept of, what inputs are we going to have to make this decision? Well, as a top executive, you get to figure out what the inputs are. That certainly gives you power because everyone wants to have their input, etc. You're there, hey, I'm making the decision, so that gives you power. Another source of power for top executives is how centralized your organization is. Your textbook uses the word centrality. I frankly haven't heard that word except for in your textbook. But how centralized your organization is. If you have a very central organization and you're a top executive, you have a lot of power. But if you have a fairly decentralized organization, there's lots of people with power below you, etc., then all of a sudden your power might not be as high. Let me give you a great example. Let's go back to the Civil War. In the North, we had a federation, which was a very centralized structure, and Abraham Lincoln was the president. But in the South, we had a confederation, and the Jefferson Davis, who was president of the Confederacy, he didn't have nearly the power that Abraham Lincoln did, not just because Lincoln, might have been just this remarkable person with lots of, inner strength and convictions and power, whatever, but Jefferson Davis had the problem that all the governors basically had power to tell Jefferson Davis, go jump in the lake. We're not going to do what you want. Oh, you need a new regiment from Georgia? No, I'm sorry, I don't want to send you one. Oh, you need more cotton from South Carolina? I'm sorry, I'm not going to send you one. So because you had a decentralized organization in the Confederacy, particularly as it started, Jefferson Davis lacked a lot of the power that we saw that Abe Lincoln had. Why? Because he had a centralized organization. Jefferson Davis had a decentralized organization. The word confederacy is basically talking about we're decentralizing. We're not putting all the power in the federal government. We're spreading it around to the states. Let's go to the last of the sources of power mentioned by the textbook, and this is access. This is access. Think about this. If there's someone who is you're top in your organization, everybody wants to talk to you. Take a look at, the President of the United States, the governor, take a look at the head of a company or whatever. Everybody wants to talk to you. Who gets to determine who gets to talk to you? You do. Because they want it, because you're in control of it, you're the main gatekeeper, you have other gatekeepers working for you. That gives you a tremendous amount of power. You know, it's amazing how fawning people get when they finally get close to someone with power, whether it's the president of their organization or whatever it might be. And that's because, oh my gosh, I finally have access to it. So again, access is also a source of power for top executives. So that finishes up the third major topic under power. Let's go to the fourth major topic under power. Some bad sides of power. You know, power certainly can be good, but it can also be bad. What are some of the bad sides of power? And your textbook mentions 3, and my guess is you could come up with a lot more than 3, but the 3 that the textbook mentions are very good. The first bad side of power is abuse. You can abuse your power. You can take advantage of your position, of your power for personal gain, for doing something unethical, doing something illegal. So there's abuse of power. That's certainly a bad side of power. Another bad side, somewhat related to that, is corruption. Corruption. All of a sudden now you're using your power to corrupt others. You know, you're using illegal activities, unethical activities or whatever. You can engage in corruption, etc., using your power. Certainly power helps one to be corrupt. You don't want to be. In fact, I think there's an old saying about that, about power corrupting people. Power corrupts or whatever. And let's go to the last of the bad sides, and that's destructive or toxic leadership. Destructive or toxic leadership. Basically what you're doing is you're not looking at, if you're a toxic leader, you're a destructive leader, you're not looking at the well-being of the organization, not looking at the well-being of your followers. You're looking at your well-being with regard to it, what you want. And you know, you get up there too, and a toxic leader is someone who turns other people off, gets people mad, and other things like that. You know, so the toxic leader, the destructive leader. There have been a number of times where someone's come into power and they've been so bad at it, they destroyed the organization they were in power over. You know, take a look at some of the Roman Empire emperors. Some of them were so awful that they ended up weakening the Roman Empire and almost destroying it. In fact, I think towards the end, some of them made such bad decisions that they were indeed destructive. So you can have destructive where you go after others, but you can even be destructive where you destroy yourself or you destroy your organization. So again, some bad sides of power, you want to keep that in mind. Let's go to the next major topic that we have under power. Why leaders abuse and are abusive and corrupt. Why are leaders abusive and corrupt? And there's a number of reasons here, and boy, the textbook gives about 10 of them. You know, you should think about this too before I even give you the list. Again, if you were in class, I'd be asking you this. Why is a leader abusive? Why is a leader corrupt? You know, power corrupts and things like that, I get it, but you know, not all leaders are corrupt. So why do we have some who indeed are abusive or corrupt? Well, the textbook, as I say, has a list of about 10. My guess is that list could go on, but this 10 is a pretty good list, a pretty extensive list. One of the reasons that you have abusive or corrupt leaders is some of them have an inflated view of self. An inflated view of self. They have a huge ego. You know, I know everything. I'm the best person, etc., you know, whatever it might be. Huge ego. So that inflated view of self leads them to be abusive or corrupt. Another reason that they're abusive, corrupt, is some of them are arrogant and controlling. You know, one of the things I absolutely hate about leaders, I haven't had many of them like this, but I really hate a leader who's arrogant. I love to look up to my leader. I don't like having my leader look down on me. So I really don't like arrogant, and a controlling aspect too. You know, help me out, tell me go left and right, but don't look over my shoulder and tell me everything to do. Don't control me like that. I certainly don't like that. I know that with regard to this, you've all heard of, you know, over-controlling parents or whatever. You probably didn't like that if you had a parent who controlled literally everything that you were doing, and some do. So let's go to another reason why we might have corrupt or abusive leaders. Some leaders, just their personalities, are rigid and inflexible. I made up my mind, I'm not changing my mind. Even though I've now heard some good reasons to change it, my decision was bad, doesn't matter, I'm rigid and inflexible. Another reason we have leaders who are corrupt, etc., and abusive, they feel entitled. Hey, everybody should come out, you know, and curtsy over here, bow before me. I'm entitled. I'm the top dog here. And of course, that allows someone to think, well, whatever I do, it has to be right. Let's go to the next reason that we have abusive or corrupt leaders. There's some people that have a willingness to use and exploit others, a willingness to abuse and exploit others. It's like, oh, great, here are all these people I can take advantage of. You might have heard, it's kind of a humorous thing, kind of a black humor type thing. You know, people who get to the top say, I want to thank all the people who allow me to stand on them and to climb to the top, you know, jump on their back or whatever and push them down. So some people really like to use others and also to exploit others. You particularly see this with regard to people in power who use their power for sexual assault and sexual harassment. Certainly they're trying to use and exploit others. It's awful, absolutely awful. Let's go to the next reason mentioned by our book, why leaders might be abusive or corrupt. They lack empathy, and they don't care for others. They lack empathy. They don't care for others. They never put themselves in the shoes of others. They never try to figure out how somebody else feels. It doesn't matter. And in some cases, they do that intentionally. Your feelings don't matter, mine do. Other times, there's just some people that just are so cold-hearted, they don't even think about, don't even know how to become empathetic or care for others. Let's go to another reason why we have abusive or corrupt leaders. Some of them are just vicious, ruthless, and uninhibited. Vicious, ruthless, and uninhibited. I hope you've never run into someone who is vicious and ruthless and uninhibited, but there are many people out there who are. And if they are vicious and ruthless and uninhibited, they're not going to stop. They're just going to attack. They're going to be ruthless against you. They're going to be vicious against you. They're not inhibited. There's nothing in their brain saying, oh, don't do this. They're uninhibited. Another reason mentioned by your book, we're down to the last three of them. Some people are power hungry. A power hungry person, power hungry leader might easily become abusive or corrupt because that's the easiest way to gain more power. I don't have to go out and do good deeds. All I have to do is have power over you and tell you what to do and abuse it. And next thing you know, I have more power, feeding my power hunger. The next involves the next reason we have abusive or corrupt leaders involves a buzz phrase, and I want you to make sure that you take a look in the textbook and understand what it means. It's called the dark triad. The dark triad. I mean, the name alone tells you this is probably not something very good. And it's associated with Machiavelli and people who are Machiavellian and they're psychopaths or narcissists. So you might want to take a look at that. If someone who's in the dark triad, you certainly don't want them to have power because they're probably going to use it for themselves and against you. They're probably going to be abusive and corrupt with regard to it. The next reason we have abusive and corrupt leaders, and this is pretty much a given. Some people are takers, some are givers. One of my secretaries years ago at Pitt, a wonderful lady, she said the seas are filled with sharks and dolphins. The sharks are the ones that attack all the time, and the dolphins are the ones who are nice all the time. So let's face it, some of your abusive and corrupt leaders, maybe most of them, are, they're takers. They're not givers. They're the sharks. They're not the dolphins out there. Well, if you have people that have any of these 10 or multiple aspects of these 10 or haven't read all of these 10, the odds are they're going to be abusive or corrupt leaders. Let's go to the next major topic that we have under power. Characteristics of followers of abusive or corrupt leaders. Why would anybody want to follow someone who's abusive or corrupt? But they do. Look around the world. Look at history. Look at all the people who followed abusive and corrupt leaders. I mean, take a look, for example, probably, one of the worst leaders, not so much from his ability to lead, but the fact that he was abusive and corrupt, of course, was Adolf Hitler, leading Nazi Germany. Well, let's take a look at some of the characteristics of followers of abusive and corrupt leaders and think, let's go back to Hitler. Do any of these fit the bill? Do any of these kind of describe the people who were supporting Hitler, particularly when he came to power, but even afterwards, how they supported them thereafter? Some of the characteristics of these followers. They're fearful. Well, they were very fearful in post-World War I Germany. They had all sorts of horrible things going on. The economy was falling. They had revolutions or whatever. So, they were quite fearful. Another characteristic of these followers is they're silent. So many of them didn't speak up. They saw Hitler rising to power. They didn't like it. They were afraid of him. They thought he was going to do bad things, but, well, it's better to be quiet. Let's not say anything about it. Other followers, they seek agreement. They're not the type to argue or whatever. Let's find a way to agree. Now, seeking agreement is a great thing. It's a very good quality to have, but there are times you don't want to agree. Do you want to agree with the devil? Of course not. So there are those who seek agreement all the time. I don't want to have any problems. Let's find a way to agree. Well, if you're doing that with someone who's corrupt and abusive, like a Hitler, that just gives that person more power. Let's give another characteristic of followers of abusive and corrupt leaders. They're compliant and not defiant. They're compliant and not defiant. Look at most of the followers he had. They were compliant. They didn't fight him. He did some awful things, and they thought, oh, okay, this is awful. But did they stand up against him? Most didn't. There were some who tried to knock Hitler off or stop him or whatever. For the most part, they were compliant. They weren't defiant. Let's take a look at another characteristic of these followers of abusive leaders. They tend to be inactive. You know, someone's doing something horrible, we have to stop them. Well, it means you have to be active. If you're inactive, you're not going to really be able to do anything to stop them from gaining power. So they tend to be inactive. Now, sometimes it's good reason. We're inactive because we're out of jobs and, you know, there's no money coming in and I got bread on the table for my family or whatever. So I don't have time to become politically active, say in Nazi Germany. But even with regard to, you know, the leaders that you might have in your own business, now, how many of you speak up? You got a bad leader. How many of you speak up? How many of you show, you know, are somewhat active in trying to stop the abuse? Very few people do that. Let's go to the next characteristic. Many people who are followers of abusive and corrupt leaders, they're fawning and flattering. Oh, whatever you want. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it took me so long. I'm in your company, and all of a sudden now they become fawns. They're not going to do anything bad. They're just so happy to be with you. And they'll flatter you too because they don't want to get you mad. They want you to be happy. If they flatter you, you're going to like them. Let's go to the next characteristic. These are all good characteristics of followers of abusive leaders, and I don't mean good that you should have it. I mean these good examples of why they are this way. Many people are submissive. Doesn't matter how bad you are as a leader, I just have to submit. They're very submissive. They don't stand up for themselves. The next, many of them are anxious. They're worried. They're concerned. They're, you know, at the edge of their seat. Oftentimes people who are anxious, sometimes they act out their anxieties. Other times they hold it in. Let's go to the next of these. We just have 3 more of these. The next reason why you have followers of abusive leaders is some of the followers are just conformist. You tell me what needs to be done, I'll conform. I don't want to fight. I don't want to go against the grain. I want to be a member of the group. I don't want to be an outsider. Remember, talk about insiders and outsiders. So many are conformists. The next reason we could have, and down to 2 of them, next reason we could have a follower of a corrupt leader is a person's collusive. They're colluding with the leaders. Like, oh my gosh, you know, you're doing something horrible. Well, let me take my little piece of the pie and I'm going to be happy. So yeah, I'll help you out because I'm going to get something out of it. They collude. There's collusion with it. And finally, the last reason mentioned by our book that you have, you know, someone who's a follower of an abusive or corrupt leader is sometimes they're confused or just overwhelmed. There's so much going on. I don't know who's right and who's wrong. I mean, think about that. How many times have you seen a situation and you might have jumped to a conclusion, this is right and this is wrong. But also, how many times you've seen a situation where there is so much information coming your way, you don't know what is up or what's down. A good example of that's what's going on now with regard to the coronavirus, COVID-19 or whatever. Look at all the information that we're getting. We're getting information saying turn left, getting information saying turn right, getting information saying go up, go down, and so much information is conflicting, and it's coming from all different sources, and it seems to be never ending. We have quite a lot of people who are confused and overwhelmed by it. If you're confused and overwhelmed and someone's trying to abuse power, you're probably not too worried about that. You're still trying to figure out how to take apart what's happening in your life, trying to make it less confusing and trying to be less overwhelmed. So that finishes up I think it was the 6th part, the characteristics of followers of abusive and corrupt leaders. Let's go to the 7th part, characteristics of organizations that allow abusive or corrupt leaders. Characteristics of organizations that allow abusive or corrupt leaders. I've got an organization and I got a bad leader. Should we kick them out? Well, some organizations let that bad leader stay. Well, what are some of the characteristics? The textbook has 7 of those. First, the culture of that organization allows or even protects it. Allows for someone to be a bad leader or even protects it. These are the ways you get to be a leader, whether the person's good or bad. As long as you did this, we just have to do it. Or, my goodness, the culture here is you never, never, go against what the leader says. I mean, a good example of this, could be in North Korea. Now, we don't get a whole lot of information coming out of it, but the people that we do tend to hear from, now there's some who escape and come across, and they're different. But the people in the country itself, it's part of the culture. The great leader or whatever, whatever he does, whatever he says, that's got to be right. We have to abide by it. Let's take a look at some other characteristics of organizations. Sometimes the organization has a huge separation between leaders and followers. That power distance that we're talking about, and the structure that we're talking about, whether it's a flat structure or whether it's a structure that has a lot of levels to it. Well, the further away from the followers that the leader gets based on the structure, probably the more the leader gets to do without having the followers do anything. The followers are so far behind, they can't do anything, or what they can do is minimal. So again, we might have this problem where there's such a separation between leaders and followers that the leaders pretty much get to do whatever they want because the followers are so far behind. Related to this, and this goes to something that we've mentioned before, you can have a high power distance in your organization. High power distance, which if you remember from earlier lectures, is where it's just expected that leaders are up here and followers are down here, and there's no interaction or whatever. You don't question, you look down, you bow, whatever it might be. So you might have a high power distance. A great example of this mentioned in class, a country that has a high power distance, or at least historically has, is Germany. Well, go back again to the Second World War and go back to Hitler and the Nazis and all the horrible things they did with the Holocaust and what they did with the Jews and the Gypsies, etc. With regard to that. What we had there is we had a huge power distance. People just assume that, hey, listen, I can't say anything. So if the leader says this, I'm either nodding in approval, I'm looking down, I'm not looking in their eyes. It's kind of like you might have heard in chicken coops. There's a status in chicken coops between chickens. You might not know this, but the top chickens, the chickens in power, are allowed to look up and look at each other. But all the rest of them, you better look down at food. Outside of that, you ever look up, we're going to come over and we're going to peck you to death. So, again, this high power distance could allow your organization to have a corrupt or abusive leader. Let's take another reason why I have organizations that allow it. There's lots of uncertainty and chaos. Lots of uncertainty and chaos. Well, look at as Hitler was rising to power. Look at the uncertainty and chaos that was going through in Germany after World War I. They had something called the Weimar Republic. And all you had was riots in the streets and people being killed and places being burned down with regard to the communists were going up against the royalists and up against the conservatives, and the socialists were out there. I mean, it was absolutely horrible. Nobody knew what was going on. A loaf of inflation was so bad. A loaf of bread could cost you, the equivalent of a million Reichsmarks. $250,000 for a loaf of bread. Are you kidding? So there was so much chaos and uncertainty. Well, again, this allows someone to rise up and stay at top, because everybody else is fighting over that loaf of bread for $1 million. 3 more reasons why organizations allow these corrupt leaders. Some organizations are really centralized, and the person at the top is in power over everybody else. There's nobody else that has any power. It's just so centralized with regard to it. Well, if that's the case, once again, the top person at the top has much more power. It's not distributed through the organization, or not distributed very much. So that allows for an abusive or corrupt leader. And it wasn't that, the situation with regard to initially the Weimar Republic, and then after Hitler came to power, he centralized the power. Nobody else really had any power to do anything about it. Let's go to just 2 more reasons here. Sometimes organizations have a short-term orientation and reward system. Short-term, we only care about tomorrow. We're not worried about a week from now, a month, a year, 5 years from now. We're only worried about tomorrow. For example, I got to get food on the table. I'm only worried about dinner coming up. How am I going to feed the kids or whatever like that? If you have a short-term orientation and reward system, and you're not really looking down the line, also you might let somebody who's in power, who's abusive and corrupt, stay there because you're not really looking down the line. You're just looking at today, and as long as you got bread on the table, maybe that's going to be okay. And then the last reason that organizations might have these abusive and corrupt leaders is bad hiring practices, bad recruiting practices. Now, I'm not so sure that that stands for Nazi Germany, although we could say that the recruiting package or practices they had, and who could run for office and other things like that allowed it. But how about in an organization where you work? If you have bad recruiting and bad hiring, you hire bad people, eventually they're going to get to the top, and they're going to end up running this in a very abusive way. So those are a number of reasons why some organizations allow abusive or corrupt leaders to continue to remain in power. Let's go to the next major topic. I think it's number 8. I might have lost track on this, so please pardon me for that. Solutions to abusive and corrupt leaders. What can we do? We've got an abusive and corrupt leader. What are some of the solutions? And your textbook lists about 9 or so. Let's take a look at some of the things you can do to try to resolve the fact that I've got an abusive or corrupt leader in this organization. One of the things is your organization can require a clear message and consistency from its leaders. Require a clear message and consistency. Now, while Hitler indeed gave a clear message, this is what we're going to do for the most part. I mean, he did pull the wool over a lot of people's eyes, but he still also is pretty straightforward telling you what I'm going to do. In most cases, a lot of these corrupt and abusive leaders don't. They lie all the way up to the top. So require a clear message and require consistency. Make sure that they do what they say and have that consistency there. Another thing that you can do to try to reduce the power or not have an abusive or corrupt leader in your organization is to have accountability. You know, if the person does something bad, well, we're going to hold you accountable. For example, look at all the corrupt and abusive leaders we've had throughout history. And again, I'm particularly looking at political or governmental leaders, but can even go into business organizations where nobody was there to say, stop it. If you do it again, I'm going to slap your hand, I'm going to fire you. You were going to kick you out of office, put you in jail, whatever. Oftentimes you don't have that type of accountability. So another thing, and let's go to the third thing you could do to try to make sure your organization doesn't promote abusive or corrupt leaders, or if you have one, maybe help to get out, is you want to try to reduce uncertainty and eliminate chaos in your organization. Reduce uncertainty and eliminate chaos. If you have an organization that's going to heck in a handbasket, or some other phrase you could use, you know, if you could do things to reduce uncertainty and reduce the chaos, and all of a sudden now people might be able to start thinking of more things other than what am I going to do in the next minute or two that we have. Let's take a look at the next suggestion your book has. You should train both your leaders and your followers. Training leaders is good. There's very few leaders who have any type of training with regard to their leadership. Train them, particularly with regard to ethics and being morally, a moral compass for everybody. But also train the followers. Hey, if these people don't do this, that, and the other, this is what we're going to do. And you should watch them. And if you see this, that, or the other, this is a red flag, a warning sign. So you can train both your leaders and followers. The next suggestion that your textbook gives, with regard to, again, keeping these abusive and corrupt leaders either out of the organization or limiting their power or getting them out of the organization, is to protect your employees. Protect your employees. One of the suggestions, and it's a great one, is allow your employees to become what are called whistleblowers. Whistleblowers. You probably have heard that phrase. You might not know what it means or where it comes from. Whistleblowers comes from, at least the first time I ever heard it being used, comes from jolly old England back in the, probably in the 1700s, but definitely in the 1800s and early 1900s. The police in England, the bobbies as they called them, didn't carry firearms. They carried billy clubs or whatever. So let's say that you're a bobby and you're on patrol in downtown London, and all of a sudden, across the street you see 4 thugs that are, beating up somebody or breaking into a store or something like that. Well, all you have is billy club. That's going to be hard to overcome 4 thugs. Maybe they even have guns, but even if they don't, one billy club against 4 might not be an even match. So what they did in the London Police Department is, instead of giving all the police officers, all the bobbies, guns or whatever, they gave them all these really big whistles, well, about that long, and you'd blow in it, and it was made a huge, loud, screeching sound for a whistle. So if you were downtown, and usually they had, police on every couple of blocks or whatever, or bobbies on every couple of blocks. If you saw some bad things going on, someone breaking the law, violating something, some rule or whatever, you blew on your whistle. And it was so loud, other bobbies in the area would hear it, they'd converge on the whistle, and then you could go up against I was about to say bad guys, it could be bad women as well, but you could go up against them, having more people on your side because you called them together. So whistleblowing was, you saw something going on that's wrong and you want to warn others and try to get others to come to help you stop whatever bad behavior it was. So in business, you have whistleblowing, where all of a sudden some worker sees some bad things that the executives are doing or whatever, and blows the whistle, usually going to some government agency and say, hey, you know what's happening here. You heard of the Enron scandals and others like that. Those occurred not because the people were caught, not because the government figured it out, it's because someone in the organization blew the whistle. But one of the things you can do, though, is you want to protect your employees. So, if you blow the whistle, your employee, everybody knows it, next thing you know, that employee's fired, people, might do all sorts of bad things to that person, minimally ostracized, maybe other things as well. So what you could do in your organization is you can have whistleblowing, but have anonymous whistleblowing. People can blow the whistle and not have to give up their name. Have a little box or whatever that only the chief ethics officer or whatever looks at. And you don't have to put down your name, so nobody knows, hey, it was Neil Fogarty who told everybody this. It was Jane Doe over here who told everybody this. Therefore, there shouldn't be any retaliation against you. So again, you can protect your employees. But the textbook lists some other things you can do to, again, try to keep out corrupt and abusive leaders. The next is you can promote open communications and transparency. Open communications and transparency. If all of a sudden the communication structure is controlled by your abusive leader, the communications are going to be limited and they're not going to be open and it's not going to be transparent. Oftentimes you're going to get propaganda out of it, not the real truth or whatever. So another thing you do is promote open communications and transparency. Let's take a look at the next reason mentioned by your book. You can get the leader involved in day-to-day activities. Oftentimes you'll find leaders end up, in a sense, almost ostracizing themselves. They're up on the mountaintop or everything, where everybody else is down in the valley. The leader has no idea what's going on, so all of a sudden this changes the way the leader thinks. The leader thinks that everybody has the same life that the leader does, which is not the same at all. So another thing you can do is make sure that the leader gets involved, comes down and meets the workers, rolls up his or her shirt sleeves, walks through the plant, walks through the facility, etc. Get that person engaged in the day-to-day activities that you have in the plant. Let's go to the next suggestion. Next suggestion is reduce follower dependence. Reduce follower dependence. Don't have, everybody's dependent on one person. That gives that person an awful lot of power. Reduce the number of people who are dependent on anybody and maybe have multiple people that they're dependent on. Just a thought, you've got to be careful there who makes a decision then if I have multiple people telling me yes, no, or whatever. And that again goes back to that clip we saw of Office Space. Remember he said he had something like 8 bosses? So anytime anything goes wrong, you have 8 people telling him bad things. So let's go to the next suggestion. The next suggestion, we're down to the last 4 here. The next is empowerment and delegation of power. Empowerment and delegation of power. Instead of putting all the power in the leader or whatever, you can delegate the power to others. You can empower others within the organization, give them some power. So in a sense, what you're doing is trying to decentralize the organization a little bit. That certainly can help. Another suggestion down to the last 3, you can have objective performance measures. Hey, you might be the president, but every year you've got to go through a performance review, and the performance review is based on these very subjective things, and not whether or not somebody likes you or is going to kowtow to you or curtsy to you because you're in power. Next suggestion, we're down to the last 2, is involve outsiders. Bring outsiders into the organization. A lot of large businesses hire outside auditors to come in to audit the books. Why did they do that? Why does, say, a Boeing, why does, say, a General Motors hire, say, a PricewaterhouseCoopers or some other accounting firm to come in and audit the books? Well, hopefully those people, if the top people are corrupt, hopefully those people aren't, and they will see that and they'll stop the corruption. And then the last suggestion to get rid of these corrupt leaders is to change the culture. Change it so that we don't allow that. Well, that finishes up what I wanted to talk to you about with regard to power. Let's now go to influence. Okay, now that we're done with power, let's spend just a few moments taking a look at influence. You might remember at the very beginning of our lecture, we said that power was the ability to influence and exercise control over others, where the definition of influence, it's the power to affect but not control the course of action. Affect but not control the course of action. So let's take a look at influence. And under influence, the first topic I want to talk about are 9 influence tactics. 9 influence tactics. Now I'm going to go through the 9 and see if you don't see some overlap between these 9 and some of the sources of power that we talked about earlier. Let's start off with the first influence tactic. It's called legitimacy. Legitimacy. This is influence based on your authority, your position, policies and rules of your organization. Authority and position, policies and rules. I have legitimate power. I have legitimate influence here. Let's go to the second example of tactic of influence, rational persuasion. Rational persuasion. I'm going to try to persuade you by giving you logic and facts. Listen, let's push the emotions aside. Let's take a look at what the facts are here. Let's put them together in a logical order. What are we going to do? Let's go to the third example of an influence tactic, inspirational appeals. Inspirational appeals. Here we're using, looking at emotions and values and needs and hopes, trying to get people to join in with us. Again, emotions and values and needs and hopes, inspirational appeals. One thing I'll mention to you is in one of the classes I teach, small business management, and also another class that's similar, negotiations, we watch a video on negotiation tactics and how to sell things, how to be persuasive. And one of the things that the speaker talks about is that if you really want to sell something, you really want to persuade somebody, what you want to do is you want to appeal to 2 things. I think there's probably a lot more, but the 2 things are pretty good. Their fears and their passions. Appeal to their fears and appeal to their passions. Well, if you do that, there's a good chance you're going to excite their emotions. Their passions will get them emotional. Their fears will get them emotional. So inspirational appeals. Now, I'm not saying those are the only 2 things to use. There are probably others as well, but I use that as an example. Let's go to the next of the influence tactics. Consultation. Consultation. Basically, what you want to do is involve others. Get other people to come on board. Sometimes they're outside consultants. Sometimes they're consultants from this group or that group. Sometimes you're just getting people, join in with you just so you have more voices saying the same thing that you're saying to try to persuade somebody. Again, that's consultation. Let's go to the 5th of these tactics. Exchange. Exchange. These are payoffs and rewards for doing something. Listen, if you do this for me, I'll give you, and fill in the blank. I'll give you a promotion. I'll give you the day off. I'll pat you on the back. I'll tell everybody what a wonderful soul you are. This is a type of an exchange. You do something for me, I do something for you. The exchange. Let's go to the next example of a influence tactic. Personal appeals. Personal appeals. You appeal to somebody based on friendship or loyalty. Hey, listen, we've known each other for years. Please trust me on this. Do what I'm saying here with regard to this. I mean, you have to be loyal to the team, loyal to the cause. This is what we've got to do. Let's go to the next of these influence tactics, ingratiation. Ingratiation. This is where you use flattery and praise and friendly behavior. Oh my goodness, you're so great, it's wonderful, etc. You try to get people in a good mood, and based on your flattery and praise, based on the fact that their ego is now soaring, maybe their guard will go down, and maybe you can get them to agree with you. Let's go to the 9th, and the 8th of these, and there's only 9. The eighth is pressure. Pressure. You're giving people warnings and demands and threats. You pressure them. My goodness, we're running out of time. You know what happens then? It's going to go away. We'll never be able to do this again. And if we can't do this again, I'll never go do business with you. You see, again, the warnings and the demands and the threats. And the last in the influence tactics, coalitions. Coalitions. And that's where you're using others to persuade. You just try to bring in people to join in with you. Maybe others who are together, they coalesce. Think about this. Let's say that you're having an argument with your parents about something, and let's say though that maybe there's and it probably isn't happening in college, but it probably happened in high school or maybe middle school. There's some sort of trip. Oh, we're all going to D.C. and you're trying to get your parents to let you go to D.C. for this trip with the class or whatever. And you say, oh my gosh, we have other things planned. It's going to cost money. You're going to fool around. We're not going to send you. Well, next thing you know, you try to get some of the other parents, together. Oh, well, we're sending Bobby and Janie over here, and da-da-da. You might even try to get the teacher involved. You're trying to build coalitions to try to persuade people to buy your theme, whatever it is you're trying to sell. Well, let's go to the second major topic under influence, the effectiveness of these tactics. The effectiveness of these tactics. According to your textbook, rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, and consultation seem to be the most effective. Rational persuasion, inspirational appeals, and consultation seem to be the most effective in influencing others. They said that pressure can backfire. It might work, but it can also backfire. Quit telling you what to do. A good example of this is to think about, again, go back to, particularly when you're a little bit younger, high school, middle school, whatever, and your parents were trying to get you to do something. Well, the harder they pushed you in one direction, the harder you might push back. So again, the pressure can backfire. Let's go to the third point under effectiveness. The textbook says that using multiple tactics increases the likelihood of success. Using multiple. Don't just look at of those 9. Don't just use one. Try use a couple of them, or 3 or 4 of them, etc. I don't think I would suggest using all of them. I think that would probably backfire as well. But try using a couple. Multiple tactics might improve the likelihood of success. The fourth, and there's just 6 points I want to mention here under the effectiveness of these tactics. The fourth is you want to look at the direction of the influence. You want to look at the direction of the influence. A couple of subpoints for you here. Rational persuasion is the only one that works with regard to organizational levels. Rational persuasion is the only one that works with regard to organizational levels. It's hard to get a whole organization to be emotional. I suppose you could. I'm not so sure I use the word only one that works, but it's probably not a bad one. Only one that works across organizational levels. It's probably true that more often than not that's going to occur. The second subpoint under the direction of the influence, inspiration works best downward. It works best downward. You're trying to inspire, your workers to do something, your followers to do something. It's hard to inspire your bosses to do something, and it's to some degree hard to inspire people on the same level as you. But downward probably works better. Let's go to the third point under the direction of the influence. They say that pressure also works best going downwards, trying to pressure your workers, your underlings. Probably works better. Try to pressure your boss. That's probably not going to work too well. And even trying to pressure those people on the same level as you, probably not going to work as well. Pressuring down, probably going to work more likely than pressuring up or sideways. And then the last of the comments they have for the direction of the influence is personal appeals and coalitions. Personal appeals and coalitions tend to work best laterally. When you're trying to get people who have the same amount of power as you, they're on the same level as you, personal appeals and coalitions tend to work best laterally. So that was the fourth point under the effectiveness of these tactics. As I mentioned, there's 6. So let's go to the fifth point. Other criteria regarding which tactics work, etc., and what's the best mix. There's some other things you probably want to look at to try to figure out which of these am I going to use, which ones maybe in combination am I going to use, what mix am I going to use. There's some things that they say you want to take a look at, some criteria in determining which. You want to take a look at sequencing. Some might be good for going in sequence, others might not. You want to look at sequence. Another thing you might want to look at our criteria, which of these am I going to use, is your personal skill with each tactic. You might be really good with one or two and really suck with some others. So again, your personal skill is going to help you in picking out which of these tactics. The organizational culture, too. You might be in an organization where it is lots of inspirational appeal. We're changing the world here. Or you might be in a culture where it's facts count. That's it. To give you an example, my father, great fellow who's no longer with us, my father was president of 2 different steel companies. And one of the things that my father, I can tell you about my father is he was always concerned about the facts. And, whenever he'd have documents typed up, or you don't have to use color, black and white. The print, black ink on white paper, that's all you need. Because the facts will speak for themselves. You don't have to use all this other stuff. That's just BS and you push it aside. So look at the culture. If you're working someplace where they're like that, well, with regard to which of these tactics you use, you probably don't want to spend a whole lot of time on color, on colorizing and making them pretty or whatever. Alternatively, if you work in a culture where, wow, this is something where we're all visual people, maybe indeed you want to do that. Let's go to just 2 more points here with regard to criteria. Another suggestion they have, or something you might want to consider, do you want to start soft and then move to hard? Do you want to start soft and move to hard? Soft tactics, and if that doesn't work, get harder as you go along. Another question they have, do 2 softs work better than 1? And is there, is there a combination, of 2 softs, 2 hards, whatever? So another thing you want to do is try to figure this out. So 2 softs better than 1. I don't know. Sometimes when you overdo it, people turn off. They just don't have enough. Think about, with regard to these things, our attention spans aren't all that good anymore. So if I go take, 2 softs, I might not be able to keep someone's attention for 1. So you might want to think about that. Let's go to the 6th and final point under the effectiveness of these influence tactics, the goal. The effectiveness of these influence tactics is a goal. You want to try to influence others to your way of thinking, to your way of doing things. You want to try to influence others, with regard to, in a sense, your political, small p, your political skills, and try to get them to do what you want to do. Keep in mind from an earlier lecture, I mentioned to you about that gift that my grandmother gave to me, about turning our goals into, turning my goal into our goals. The same thing that, my grandmother gave me that letter opener. Said diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your own way. Diplomacy is the art of letting someone else have your own way. If you can do that, you're pretty persuasive, you're pretty influential with regard to it. Well, let's go to the 3rd and final topic under influence, and the final topic then for the power and influence section is 3 influence outcomes. If you use influence, what are the 3 outcomes you're going to get? One outcome is commitment. And people are going to jump on board. They're going to like what you're doing, and they're going to be committed to what you're doing, and it's something that's now theirs, and they're driven to it. The next outcome is compliance. Well, I'm going to do it. I don't really want to do it. I don't really care. So I guess I'll do it. That's compliance. And then the last of the outcomes, the one you want to be the most concerned with, is resistance. What? You want me to do what? I'm never going to do that. Whatever you say, no, we're going to stop you, etc. So you certainly don't want to have resistance. So with regard to the outcomes, the best outcome is to get commitment. So with regard to compliance, you really don't want to get resistance. Now, if you do, you get resistance. One of the things you might want to do is, let's go back to change when we talked about change. Didn't we talk about resistance? You might want to take a look at that. Well, that finishes up this topic that we have with regard to power and influence. Now, the next topic I'm going to have is actually going to be a short video for you. I want to talk about this independent case presentation we're going to have. I'll have a short presentation on that, short video on that. There's a lot of information on the Canvas and their syllabus about it, but I do want to talk about it. So that'll be our next video. Hope everybody enjoyed what we talked about with regard to power and influence, and hope everybody has a great evening. Good night, everybody.